What's up everybody, I'm Jesse Showalter and I'm a digital designer that focuses on user interface and user experience design. And in today's video, I'm gonna show you how I use Affinity Designer to create seamless and beautiful digital experiences. I'm gonna be designing a mobile podcast player application, an iOS or an Android app most likely, and I'm gonna be creating some custom icons using some awesome features like symbols and artboards and smart guides to create a consistent and elegant mobile experience for our users. If you'd like to follow along with me, there's a link down in the description to download my starting Affinity Designer file. Feel free to download, open it up, follow along, but for now, let's jump into the computer and get started. All right, I have Affinity Designer open. I'm just gonna press Command or Control N to open up a new document. We can see all of the different devices on our new document. It could be print or photo or web. We're choosing devices and we're gonna go with an iPhone X. That is a pretty standard size. It's a little bit larger on the canvas, but that's gonna allow us to have some fun while still designing and thinking mobile. So you can see our dimensions are 375 by 812, and all that looks all right for now. So let's just go ahead and press Create, and Designer opens up. And we have our very first artboard. You can see I can move around, I can zoom in and out. I can grab the artboard and actually move the artboard around. And what's even greater is I can actually duplicate the artboard simply by holding down Option or Alt and dragging it over. But we're gonna take this artboard number 1 and we're gonna name this Podcast Player. So I'm thinking we're gonna have 2 screens. We're gonna have, actually not a podcast player, but let's do podcast list, and then we're gonna have a second artboard that is our podcast player or our episode screen. All right, to get started, why don't we draw our header in? I'm thinking we can use some organic shapes, have a little fun with it, and use some fun, kind of bright, vibrant colors. So I'm gonna grab my, my pen tool. So I'm just clicking here in the toolbar, or I can hit the hotkey of P. So I'm gonna do that. And we can either do the pen tool, or we can actually experiment by pressing M and going to our shapes. And if I keep pressing M, I cycle through the different types of shapes, square, ellipse, or rounded. But I'm gonna go ahead and grab a square. Why don't we actually do this? So I'll just drag a square out like so. And why don't we take the border off of it? I'm just doing that with my stroke and my fill colors up here. And why don't we choose a nice color? So why don't we pick kind of like a fun, vibrant, almost like a bluish purple color. I think that could be kind of cool. All right, now that we have that shape in there, I'm gonna go ahead and zoom in on what we're working on. And not to say that the square is not exciting, because it's kind of not, but maybe we wanna add something kind of interesting to it. So I'm just gonna go ahead and convert it to curves by pressing right here. Once I convert it to a curve, I can actually grab my node tool here from the tools panel, and I can hover over the edge and I can actually bend and bow. I can even click on any one area and add a node. So we can bend, we can add a node that's gonna allow us to manipulate the curvature. So why don't we do just like a really mellow curve? Just something that's a little bit more like a wave. Why don't we take this, I'm gonna press Command or Control C and V to duplicate and have another version of this. And why don't we then double click on it again, and let's kind of like really accentuate the curves on this second version. I'm just gonna do something like this, maybe wave it out that way. That'll be cool. And then we'll take our top 2 nodes. Let's drag those down a little bit actually. That way we can move this whole thing up, and we can actually go now and we can play with like the color, or maybe even play with the blending mode. So let's do multiply, and then we'll just bring it down so you can't see it as much. But now we just have like a little bit of variance there. Let's do one more. I'm just gonna duplicate this out by holding down the Option key and dragging it out. And I'm gonna double click on it again. And why don't we make this one more of a wave that comes across like that. So we're just gonna play with shape here, have some fun. Hit my V key, my normal selection tool. And let's come up here and let's change it from multiply to something like screen. We're just playing literally at this point, having fun with blending modes and seeing what we can do with them. So why don't we bring it down like that and drag it up. And we have some sort of cool kind of wavy lines. I think maybe I want the whole thing to be separated a little bit, and I want them to match a little bit more. So I'm just messing with the lines and having a little bit of fun as we go. Let's go back up to multiply, and maybe we'll bring the opacity of it down some more. Just some kind of cool, fun dimensionality. I'm gonna grab all of the elements, press Command or Control G to kind of group them together. I'm gonna call this my header over in my layers panel. Always name your layers, it's important. Okay, next up, I'm gonna drag some typography inside of here. But first, before I go any further, I really should turn on my grid and turn on my guidelines. So I can do that by heading up to View and accessing showing the grid or showing the rulers or showing the guide. So I'm gonna turn on the grid. You're gonna see that go on. I'm gonna turn on the guides, and I'm also gonna show my rulers, okay? I'm gonna press Z and just use my zoom tool to kind of move in so we can see what we're doing. Now I have a grid, and you can see down here on the white section a little bit more. It's there, it's not very exact. And the reason you wanna use grids inside of Affinity Designer or when doing interface work at all is so you can really line things up, have them be very, very exact. It's great to pull out guidelines from the side and stick to those, but as we're creating other interface elements inside of the structure that's not necessarily anchored to the left or the right-hand edge of the artboard, we want to be able to have some control. We want to use this for our typography. We want to use this for spacing and creating vertical rhythm inside of our design. And so we want to take a moment and just kind of spend some time on our grid. So we're going to head right here and we're going to go to the grid and the axis manager. We're going to bring that up and you can see it come into view right there. We have some presets. We have the automatic grid being kind of like created on our design. And one of the things we really care about is this little edge over here, how it doesn't end perfectly on a grid line. There's a lot of ways that you can do this, but by heading over to basic, you can see we now have spacing. That's a 72-point grid. Some of the standards are an 8-point grid or a 10-point grid. So we're gonna start dropping this down to something like an 8 or a 10-point grid. Now it's still not lining up correct. So what I like to do is add some of these little divisions in here, a 3x3 grid inside of each one of my little grid squares. And then we can come back and we can start manipulating until we get something that lines up as close as possible. So our 15 pixel grid lines up actually pretty close on the edge of our artboard, and that's because of the width and the dimensions of our artboard. So I like to make grids corresponding to my artboard, and when those grid lines feel a little bit big, I like that Affinity Designer allows me to add these divisions inside so I can get a little bit more nitty gritty. So now that we have our grid all established, I like the look of it. We can turn it off really easily with the Command or Control and comma key up here, or apostrophe key, excuse me. So just turning that one on and off. We can also do the same thing with our guides. So with that being said, I'm now gonna drag a guide out. I'm gonna have it be about 25 pixels from the left-hand edge. We might as well just do 30 since that lines up with our guide. This one's gonna be the same. When I say 30, what I'm also meaning is it's just 2 grid boxes away. So I'm just gonna drag that 1, 2 grid boxes out. Now I don't even have to do the math. I'm basing everything off of grid boxes and size that way. It feels really nice, feels really, really clean. So now that we've done that, why don't we bring a shape element in, like maybe an avatar for our user account. I'm gonna hold down the shift so that I can strain as I drag it out. And again, I'm gonna use my grid. I'm just gonna snap that because I do have my snapping on up here in the top right-hand corner of my interface. I'm gonna turn my snapping on and I'm going to give this a nice bright color so we can see it. This is gonna be my avatar. To create an avatar, I'm just dragging in the shape. That's gonna kind of be my mask. And I have an image over on my desktop of myself that I'm gonna drag in, and it's gonna be my avatar image. So over here in my layers panel, you can see I have my avatar image and I have my ellipse, my shape. All I'm gonna do is take my avatar image and drag it underneath and actually drag it to the right-hand side. And we want the mask, so we're gonna kick in our indentation and just realign our avatar like that. So now we have our avatar. Let me just name that avatar right there. And again, it's lining up on our grid perfectly. It looks really, really good. Why don't we add some typography and we'll line that up to our grid. We'll start seeing this interface kind of come alive with some typography. I'm gonna hit T for text or T for typography. And I'm gonna go ahead and just click, and that drops some area text onto my screen. I'm gonna use a font today called Poppins. It's one of my new favorite fonts for doing interface work. And I'm gonna make sure that the color of this text is gonna be white. I'm just gonna say something like, welcome, Jesse. So this is gonna welcome us to our account as we log into our podcast player. Let's take our text and we can come over here to our typography settings over here in our contextual panel up top. When we select the typography, you can drop down and select it this way. You can also input a number here, 20, or with my mouse hovered over that area, I can actually just scroll on my mouse wheel, or I'm using a magic mouse, so I can literally just do this and it ups it increases or decreases the size of my typography. I think something like 24, but before we do that, let's pick a standard body copy. Let's do a little bit of a modular scale, a really fast and simple one to get us started. Legible text inside of our app will probably be something like maybe 18 pixels, maybe a little bit less, maybe 16 pixels, and we have it on regular. That could be our kind of standard body copy. Now we can duplicate that standard body copy and use the golden ratio to create the next step of headline and create this typographic scale. So let's do 16 pixels times 1.618, which is the golden ratio. That's gonna give us 25.9. Let's just round it to 26 because I like nice round numbers. And while we're here, why don't we bump it up to like another weight so we can see a little bit of that contrast. And if there's not enough contrast there for you, a better rule of thumb is to go from regular, medium to semi-bold, is to skip 2 weights or to move up 2 weights. So we might actually want to take our body copy and drop it down to light and then allow our next headline to jump up to medium. That looks a little bit better to me. Let's do it one more time, just so we have a massive headline if we really need it. And I love that smart snapping. It's snapping to my grid as I go. If you don't like that snapping, you can just change the snapping settings, turn them off, or just turn off your grid and you can put it wherever you'd like it to be. You are still gonna get some smart snapping as opposed to the guidelines or lining it up to other elements you can see there, like the avatar. And so that's a pretty nice thing. But I do like to work with my grid on and flip it on and off as I go. So let's take 26 points and let's, again, times it by 1.618, doing a little bit of math up there. And we have this massive headline. That's probably gonna be too big for us. So why don't we just round it down to 40? Again, we're using that golden ratio for some structure, and then we're manipulating it as we see fit. Sometimes though, I like to break from my grid and just say that's maybe just a little too big and I need to come down and just alter it myself. And so we have something at 26, we have something at 34. Let's jump it up to semi-bold or maybe even bold. So now we have a lot of contrast there. I think I like the semi-bold a little bit better, okay? And you'll notice that as I am creating this typographic scale, I'm aligning each of the baselines of the typography to the bottom of my grid. That way I can say, hey, I need to figure out a typographic rhythm or vertical rhythm for my project. So I know that my headlines, for instance, you can see here, is gonna be 2 grid blocks away as I start writing out my text. That gives me a nice relational aspect between the headline and the typography. Well, I really like these character styles. I really want to save them. And so I'm actually going to open up my textiles panel over here on the right-hand side. And you can see there's some textiles that are already created. Like if I drag a duplicate of our body copy out and I actually click on body copy here, it's going to assign the predefined body copy styles into it. We don't want that. What we actually want to do is we want to come to body copy and we want to update body copy to reflect what we have in here. Similarly, we want to come down to maybe our heading 2 and we want to update that one. Why don't we come to our heading 1 and we update that style as well. And now we have our body copy, our heading 1 and our heading 2, and all those are saved. All right, we have a few character styles set in place. We'll probably add more to that as we go, but let's get back to work. I can confidently delete this headline 2 without worrying about having to recreate that style later. I know it's gonna be there for me. Okay, cool. So we are now just deciding how close this text goes, maybe something like that. Let's turn off our grid and let's see our design starting to come together a little bit. So welcome, Jesse. I think there should probably be a question down here, something like, what will you listen to today? With a little question mark. Just welcoming us to the application. Now, let's get rid of this thing so it'll clear up for us. I like that. I think it looks pretty cool. What I want to start doing though is I want to start immediately getting to the content. This is a podcast application and we want to, as quickly as possible, show people different episodes and what they're actually going to be listening to. So why don't we go ahead and start doing that right now. I'm going to start building some interface components. So the first thing I'm going to do is press M to go to my shapes and I'm going to cycle through, let me just zoom in so you can see as I press M, not to my normal rectangles, but to my rounded rectangles. So let's come back and draw a rounded rectangle. Let's turn our grid back on. And I'm gonna draw a rounded rectangle from the top edge of this grid and my guide. And I'm gonna draw it down maybe somewhere like that. Now, I like this, but these rounded edges are a little bit too intense for me. So I'm just gonna grab this little red node in the top left-hand corner. I'm gonna stretch that out and maybe give it something like a 6% border radius. Let's turn that off so we can see it. Something like this. And I think you'll probably see it a little bit better if we come over to our effects panel and add a little bit of an outer shadow. Let's bump our outer shadow, the radius of it up, and then the offset. How much will we offset it? We're gonna use the angle in our offset tool, and we can, again, hover over the angle and just with our mouse wheel, scroll to change the direction of it. And let's go ahead and just, again, bump the radius up, which is kind of blurring it, and then taking our offset down. And we gotta be really a lot more subtle with these shadows because that's really intense right now. I'm gonna bring the opacity of the shadow way down. I always keep drop shadows under 8%, 10%, but these I'm gonna have somewhere around 5. I don't want them to be really intense. Something nice and light and airy, it just gives a little bit of dimensionality. Another way to bring dimensionality into our project though, is now we have a background that's white and we actually have this text block that's white. So I'm gonna grab a normal rectangle and I'm gonna drag that rectangle over the entire artboard. Let's just make sure it's all the way to the top. And with my left and right bracket keys, I'm gonna press Command left bracket. I'm gonna drop it to the back of my layer stack. You can see as I do that, that element just moves around right there. So that's a really nice quick hotkey to do that. Why did I do that? Because what I really wanna do is just have more of an off-white color. So why don't we hit grayscale and just do something that's a little bit off-white. Not way down here so it's really drastic, but just a little bit. I think somewhere in there. I like this grayscale slider because it's very, very easy to manipulate. So I'm just getting a little bit of an off-white. I'm at 96 on the grayscale, okay? And I'm gonna go ahead in my layers panel here. I'm gonna lock that background. I'm gonna name it first, BG to represent background. And while we're here, we might as well lock that header because we're gonna be working on top of it. We don't wanna really mess with it anymore. So once we create this interface component, it's gonna become really easy to reuse them. We're gonna create some custom iconography in here, as well as some symbols. So we have some reusable buttons and other components like that. So why don't we just, again, hit M, go down to the rounded rectangle, or I'll tell you what, why don't we just copy and paste the current one that we have, and we'll go to our effects and make sure that that outer shadow is turned off. We are going to just change the size of this, and I'm gonna come up here and let's see, we want it to be about 80 pixels that way, or 80 points that way, 80 points that way. Okay, pretty good, pretty close. I'm gonna grab both of these elements and I'm gonna use my alignment tools right here on the top. I'm just gonna go ahead, align to center, align vertically to the center, and let's give this a color so we can see it really quickly. But so far so good. Let's zoom a little further in on our element. Okay, cool. So we have similar spacing around the side here. And this is gonna be for some of our podcast art. Okay, so we have our shape selected. I'm gonna go ahead and just bring in a bunch of podcast art and drop it right there on my artboard. And then I'm going to just bring the really large ones down in size really quickly like that. So we can see what we're working with. And I'm gonna zoom back in. I'm gonna take all of these. Well, let's start with the first one. Well, let's just grab all of them, shall we? I'm gonna move this layer up so we can see our layers panel. I'm gonna grab all of my artwork here. I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna mask it inside there. Let's take this one and move it down. Let's start with this one. This is 99% Invisible, one of my favorite podcasts. Just gonna stretch it into place. Let's go ahead and hide that one. We'll do the same thing with this one. Just centering all of my artwork. And it's gonna look really good. When I have all of my artwork saved this way, it'll be really easy then later on just to duplicate this layer and change a few things about it, hide and show certain artwork, change the title to it, no problem, pretty good stuff. So that's good enough right there. Why don't we just go ahead and put some of those back, and now we have our rounded rectangle. So we're gonna grab both of these things, group them together. Let's call this podcast card, like that. We can twirl it down and we can see all the elements inside of it, looking pretty good. I think I'm going to just copy and inside of my podcast card, paste some typography here. And why don't we use our character styles to, our text styles here, to go a heading 2, and we'll make this heading black. And this one might be a little bit too big for our card. So let's try actually our body copy, and we'll make it black. You can notice that I'm amending or changing some of the things about our body copy or our saved style. I changed it to black. It doesn't necessarily change it everywhere. I'm just altering it for this use case, which is pretty cool. So with the altering, I'm also going to change the weight there. I'm going to put the name of the podcast, like 99% invisible. That's not how you spell invisible. Invisible like that. Good. And then we're definitely going to have to create some sort of supporting text, something that's a little bit softer, a little bit smaller, and a little bit lighter to put kind of some supporting text here. So how about 10 new episodes? Let's make sure these are both left aligned using our alignment tools right there. And why don't we just bring that up? So give it a little bit of space like that. Maybe drop it down a little bit so it's inside of here. And I think that could be possibly the start of our card. We could have maybe even a progress bar that shows us how much we've listened to, like, of this podcast. Or maybe we can leave some space down here for some custom iconography. Why don't we go ahead and dive in and do a custom icon, shall we? Okay, cool. So let's do a custom icon, maybe a share icon right here in the bottom right-hand corner so we can share this podcast with some other people. I'm gonna start my custom icon outside of my podcast card. I'm gonna hit M, I'm gonna grab myself a normal rectangle, and I'm going to draw out my shape just like that. And I'm thinking there's a couple different ways you can do icons inside of Affinity Designer. I can kind of just use the stroke, and if I wanted to create like a stroked or an outlined icon, I can do it this way. And then kind of manipulate some things. I can convert these to curves, and then add some new curves in here, like one here and one there, maybe another one right there. I can come in and manipulate those curves, delete them, like we can come right here, and we could break them apart, right? So now when we delete our nodes, we just have this open box. That's definitely a way to start, and it's looking pretty good so far. What we really want, though, is a share icon. So why don't we take our pen tool and draw out just a little bit from there. We'll select this node as well, and then we'll draw a little bit out from there as well. I can manipulate this. I could get really nitty-gritty with it if I wanted to. I can grab my node tool and edit it, and I think they should come in just a little bit. So now I'm gonna nerd out a little bit on icon design. But that's the start of our share icon. What we want next is most likely to hit the pen tool, come down here and draw a little arrow that leads out. So it's copying the same stroke style, which I really, really like. I'm gonna work from here, hold down shift so I get these 45-degree angles. Let's draw something right there and do the same thing over there. So now we have a nice little arrow that pops out. I think the whole thing is probably out too far. And why don't we grab this node and just bring it up. So just some little tweaks, little adjustments that are happening there. So now that we have our podcast card created with our new share icon inside of it, we can duplicate them. And so I'm just gonna hold down Option and drag it down and give it a nice spacing. And then after that, I'm gonna press Command or Control J just to duplicate multiple of them down the screen. All right, and so now we have those duplicated, and I'm gonna fast forward this next part because it's basically just me filling each one of these podcast cards with different information. Here we go. All right, now that we have those duplicated and all of the information is inside of them, we need to duplicate also our artboard. The reason we're gonna do that is because it's gonna bring a lot of the styles over, as well as the grids and the guidelines we already have established. I'm just gonna hold down Alt, I'm gonna drag over a new copy of this artboard, and boom, you have another design right there. It's pretty great, it's pretty fantastic. Let's turn off the grids and the guides, and let's get rid of the things that we don't need. For instance, all of the extra podcasts. We're thinking we clicked right here on this podcast, and it's led us over to the new screen where it's gonna give us the details about this podcast and the episodes that are available. All right, now that we have all this set up, we're definitely gonna want some sort of arrow that goes back so our user can navigate to previous screens. I'm thinking we take our share icon. So now I've zoomed in on my share icon, I'm going over to my symbols panel, and I'm gonna go ahead and detach this one so that I can actually manipulate this without messing with the rest of the symbol. Let's just rotate it on its side like that. Let's head up to the color and make sure it's white, and let's just bump up the size. I'm gonna make sure it's center aligned and then brought out to the very edge of my podcast art like that. All right, now the user has a way to navigate back to where they were, and that's looking pretty good, pretty good. We're gonna create one more icon here, a really, really simple icon, and it's gonna just be kind of a meatball menu icon. So let's hit M and go down to our ellipse shape. We just wanna fill this little ellipse that we're creating. We wanna make it maybe a little bit bigger, and then we just wanna have 3 of them. And we want to distribute. We're gonna use our distribution tool, so just distributing them horizontally, group them together, call it a meatball. And then while we're here, why don't we create a symbol out of that? And also let's create a symbol out of that, arrow. So we're just gonna rename it arrow so that we can reuse it later on if we want to. Okay, everything's looking pretty good. I'm just gonna drag this meatball menu icon all the way over to the right. I'm gonna grab my text and my 2 icons, and I'm gonna center them so they're all level and looking real nice, okay? And while I'm here, why don't I just grab all of them, group them together, and call this top nav. That way I can move it around as one piece without messing anything else up. All right, so we have our kind of top nav up here. We have our podcast art, and we're starting to put some information in here. This should be something like an episode number, right? So like episode 002, The Secret Life, okay? And we want that to just stand out a little bit more. So let's pump that up. Why don't we just remove that and remove these portions as well. I don't like how I misspelled it out here, to live and die. Now we have the title of the episode in there. We want to put some publisher information, host information down there. So let's just reuse our information there. And why don't we grab these elements and bring them over into this layout, okay? So I'm gonna zoom in so we can start focusing on what we're doing. Just bump this up a little bit. And now we're just playing with our spacing. This podcast is actually produced and published by a company called Tenderfoot Media. So we'll put that there. And then we'll put the publisher or the host name. His name is Neil Strauss. He's a real cool guy. Did a good job on the podcast. We like it. So let's move that down into place. And I'm gonna bring those elements together, group them together. And now we have that information right there. And let's just space it out a little bit better. I want to make sure that these have connection, like they actually relate to one another. And then from there, we're definitely going to want to bring this piece down. Let's just get rid of it and bring it back so it's on its own layer. Bring it back down to light. Actually, we could just cheat that and go back over and make sure it's our body copy, right? But we do want to make sure that we're not using artistic text like this. Instead, we want to use area text or frame text. So we're going to grab frame text, turn our guidelines and grids back on, and draw a big frame that we can then paste some text into. So I'm just going to drop this text from the podcast right in, and now we have a little bit of a description for our podcast and our episode. And then now that those things are all together, we want to create the podcast player so people can actually navigate, press play, press pause, so on and so forth. So I'm going to hit M and bring up my normal rectangle shape. Draw a square here, or a rectangle, and I think I want this to be a little bit more dramatic and stand out. So I'm gonna do an off black color, and then we want to create a play and a pause button. So I'm gonna zoom in, hit M again, but cycle down to my ellipse. And while we're here, why don't we go and fill it with this awesome purple color that we've been using throughout. I'm gonna grab both elements and just align them. And then I'm gonna grab my special shape tool, and I'm gonna use the triangle, just draw a little triangle in there. and I'm gonna fill that with white, and I'm gonna rotate it on its side, maybe shrink it down a little bit. Now, you can grab both elements and you can align them mathematically, but they're not actually gonna be aligned in this use case. It's an optical illusion with this triangle. So what I like to do is actually just visually balance it by kicking it over a little bit, grouping both of them together, and now you have a play button. I'm gonna hit play, I'm gonna type in play and name it here, and then go back and create a symbol out of it. Then I'm gonna duplicate and make a new instance of that symbol. I'm gonna detach it, because where there's a play button, there's gotta be a pause button. So let's go ahead and just do some pause bars inside here, like that. Let's delete our triangle. And with this one, I'm gonna group my pause buttons together, and this one I can't actually mathematically balance. It'll look right. I'm gonna call this one pause, and I'm gonna create a symbol out of that one. So let's say our podcast is currently being played. That's a good thing. We would see some little audio waves. So let's create some audio waves. And I'm gonna do that really simply by getting a rounded rectangle out, and I'm going to just stretch out one like that, make sure these are all lined up, right? And I'm going to most likely make these our purple color. I want to fill it with our purple color. And then I just want to duplicate tons of these and change all the size. So I'm probably going to do that in fast forward. I'll see you on the other side of that. Okay, now that I've created a bunch of just alternating and different size lines, what I want to do is I'm going to lock my background. I want to grab not all of these, but some of these, and then I just want to swatch them down to a kind of like a lighter gray. So you can see some portions have been played and other portions have not. Like we're still going and progressing. This is an iOS application, so you always have to put in a little pull tab down at the very bottom. And I would recommend, if you want to learn more about that, referencing the human interface guidelines that Apple puts out for all of their design work. I'm gonna put that down at the bottom. Now we have a spot to pull. And I'm gonna grab all of those elements and group them together. That's our sound wave. I'm gonna group the whole thing together right there. And we can now maybe center this a little bit more. Or what we could do is instead take our sound wave and just stretch it out to the very end. I like that a little bit better. So that looks pretty good. And again, we want to probably put the title of the episode down here so people can see it. So let's make sure that we choose a color that works, and we want to make sure that it is up above so we can see it. So this is episode 2, The Secret Life. That's the one we're currently listening to. We can take the size of that down a little bit, center align the text, center everything up, and bring that here. And the last thing we'll do is create one more little icon that allows us to skip forward by 15 seconds or skip backwards by 15 seconds. So now we have 15 seconds forward and 15 seconds back. Let's unlock the black portion there. And we're grabbing all of the elements, grouping it together, and calling it player, okay? Now, I'm gonna make a symbol out of it because I could see this being used a lot in the rest of our application, but I'm gonna drag an instance of it out over here as well. So if I changed the background in one place to be something else, like that, it would change everywhere. So let's turn our grids and our guides off. I think probably for consistency's sake, we probably want to have our meatball menu over here as well, don't we? I think we probably do. Let's line these two things up. We'll just align them like so. And that is pretty much our podcast player built right here in Affinity Designer. Well, that's it. That's how I use Affinity Designer to make amazing interfaces and seamless experiences for users. If you've enjoyed this video, make sure to say thank you to Seraph for putting out this amazing series, this 2020 lockdown series, and inviting myself and all of these other amazing creatives to participate. Leave a thumbs up on this video, subscribe to their channel. They put out tons of content as well as amazing applications for us creatives to use. I hope you guys are having an amazing week designing amazing things, making amazing things, and staying safe. See you in the next one.